I'm going to have to get used to this. It's a different way of doing things. I don't really understand it. Anyway, there we are. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's hope this is working. It looks as if I might be on a bit of a slope. It's rather bright, and I'm rather far away. So let's see what we can do about improving things a bit. Dull it down a bit. How's that? Don't quite look as if I'm shining with uncreated light anymore. Okay. Well, that looks less worse. Oh. Well, it's one of those days. It was a beautiful day yesterday, rather chilly, but it was nice and sunny. I managed to get out of the garden at some point and plant a whole series of cuttings that somebody had given me. And then there's another group of things arriving by post by somebody else. And I'm not going to embarrass that person by saying who that is. It's really exciting to see the garden beginning to I need to say, take root, beginning to shape up is nice. There's something about planting bulbs particularly I find exciting. You plant these things and they look so unpromising. And then slowly you begin to realize that, sometime around about Christmas time, you begin to see things beginning to pop up, which is rather wonderful. Oh, I can see people are coming. So we've got Gary. Good morning, Gary. God bless you. Hans. Oh, do I know you, Hans? And anyway, good morning. God bless you. And Ahmed. God bless you as well. Your prayers. And we'll hopefully other people will be turning up as well. Really seems. I'm sure that'll come in time. Right, today, apparently there are 5 of us watching. It might include me, I'm never quite sure. Anyway, never mind. Have a drink and then we'll crack on. We're going to start doing something a bit different in this church from tomorrow onwards, and that is that on Wednesday evenings we have Vespers at 6 o'clock. That ends at about 6:40. Normally this means that by the time Brother Matthew and I get home, it is well past our bedtime, and I, for one, am never really hungry. It's probably the case for everybody else as well, although not everybody goes to bed at 8 o'clock, like I do. But it gives us the opportunity to have supper here. So we're inviting people to come, bring and share supper, based around things like soup and, obviously it's going to be vegan and so on. But in that it's a fasting meal, it needs to be fasting. So we're not expecting people to bring lobsters and crayfish and other expensive things and caviar like that. Hello, good morning. So if you're in the area and you want to do that, then do come. It doesn't matter if you don't bring food. The most important thing is bring yourself. By the time we've blessed it, the food always seems to multiply anyway. Today we're going to be looking at Acts chapter 18, verses 18 to 23. If you read that through, it looks pretty unpromising, but somehow or other there seems to be quite a lot of interest within that particular small passage. So without any further ado, let's crack on. So Paul still remained a good while. Then he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria, and Priscilla and Aquilla were with him. He had his hair cut off at Cenchreae, for he had taken a vow. And he came to Ephesus and left them there, but he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to stay a longer time with them, he did not consent, but took leave of them, saying, I must by all means keep this coming feast in Jerusalem, but I'll return to you, God willing. And he sailed from Ephesus. And when he had landed at Caesarea, and gone up and greeted the church, he went down to Antioch. After he had spent some time there, he departed and went over the region of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthening all the disciples. Morning, Penelope. Now that doesn't seem like it's got very much in it, but somehow or other I seem to have an entire page of notes. How extraordinary. Oh, it looks as if we've got a bit of frozen notes. Come back again. How extraordinary that should be the case. Anyway, here we go. So verse 18 says, Paul still remained a good while. Then he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria, and Priscilla and Aquilla were with him, and he had his hair cut off at Cenchreae, for he had taken a vow. Now there's quite a lot of discussion over this little verse here. It doesn't seem as if there should be, but it's interesting that there is. So first of all, where is he coming from? Well, he's coming from Corinth. And the big thing to remember about Corinth is that poor old Sosthenes has had a thoroughgoing beating, probably from the Roman population of Corinth, or the Greek congregation, Greek people of Corinth. Sosthenes himself is Jewish and brought a charge against St. Paul, and Gallio has taken not the blindest bit of notice of any of this, thrown it out of court, and when the other people go on and beat up poor old Sosthenes, it's quite funny in a way, not for him it wasn't, but he himself had expected Paul to get a beating, and the beating landed on him. The beaten, as it were, is beaten. Anyway, St. Paul then stood, it says, remained a good while. So he remains there in Corinth. He doesn't run away from the situation. He stays there, and he sort of encourages the church and keeps it going, despite the fact that they obviously had this fairly big problem. And if you're taken in front of the consul, so being dragged before the most important person most important judge in the area, a friend of Caesar's, and so it went on. So it's a big issue. So St. Paul doesn't run away, he stays to sort it out. Now, it says there in Greek, in English it says, he remained a good while. In Greek it says, emeras, which means day, ikanas. Ikanas means full or enough. So he stayed there enough days, a fullness of days. It says in English a good while. It doesn't really mean that. In other words, he stayed long enough to sort out the problem. It might be, I don't know, I might go somewhere, there's a problem, and I stick around until the problem is sorted. And that really is the idea that's going on here. And he completes what he came to do, sorts out everything, and now what is he going to do? He is sailing for Syria. He's going to go to Jerusalem, and he sets off for Syria to begin with, and he takes with him Priscilla or Prisca and Aquilla. We'll come on to that in a moment. He's going to go to Antioch, he's going to go to Jerusalem, and he's going to report back to the church what he has done, the two great missionary centers at that time. And note it's not Rome. Rome is not even thought of at that stage. Then it says, well, it might be worthwhile. We'll come on to Priscilla and Aquila in a moment. He's going to Antioch first because they were the ones, if you remember, who commissioned him to begin with. They commissioned him, sent him off, laid hands on him, and he then set off on this particular missionary journey. And so, having done this missionary journey and spent several years doing so, he now returns back to Antioch to let them know firsthand what has happened. He's making a report back to the people. That's a pretty important thing. Later, he's going to go to Jerusalem and report back to them as well. So, what does he do? He takes Priscilla and Aquila with him, and he came to, oh, he's had a haircut. We'll just go back for a moment. I'm a bit muddled today. It's because I only had about 3.5 hours sleep last night. I have no idea why. I was wide awake until well past 1:30 in the morning, and then woke up my normal time about 4:30. So I'm feeling dead beat. Anyway, shake myself and come to my senses, and hopefully the rest will be okay. He had his hair cut. Now, it's not quite clear who had his hair cut. The Church Fathers, and in fact modern theologians and scholars, are muddled about this as well. They're not sure whether it was Aquilla or St. Paul who had his hair cut. One or other of them, or both, made a vow. It does say only in the singular, he had his hair cut, not they. And whichever of the two had their hair cut. Now, in chapter 21, St. Paul has clearly had his hair cut also, but that's about 3 years later. He is doing so with various other men as well. Can't remember, the 3 or 4 other people, other men. They all have their hair cut and they go into the temple in order to make the obligatory sacrifice. There is no sacrifice mentioned here. And that itself is quite interesting, because you'd expect St. Paul to want to make a sacrifice, or to be saying, I'm going to go to Jerusalem to make a sacrifice. But it takes him some while to get to Jerusalem, so that again doesn't really make a huge amount of sense. You'd expect him to fulfill the vow, which normally took 40 days, have his hair cut, immediately go to Jerusalem, make the sacrifice, then carry on with whatever he's going to do. But that there is no sacrifice mentioned makes people like St. John Chrysostom reckon that possibly it's Aquilla, who is a Gentile who has been interested in Judaism and is now Christian, who has carried on this practice, but without the sacrifice, into Gentile Christianity. And if that's the case, that's really rather interesting. And clearly it is a practice that has now come to an end. We don't do it anymore. I'm bald because all my hair fell out, not because I'm constantly making vows. And he came to Ephesus and left them there. But he entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they had asked him to stay a longer time with them, he did not consent. Right, so he's gone from Cenchreae, which is only about 7 miles away from Corinth, and he's now crossed over the sea by boat, and he's now arrived in Ephesus. Now, Ephesus is a really interesting place for St. Paul to be, an amazingly important place. In Ephesus, you have the enormous statue of Diana of the Ephesians. You can look it up. It looks extraordinary, rather ugly. And this was then housed in a massive temple, which even then was well over, well, coming up about 400 years old. It had been built with money from Alexander the Great, or as I grew up knowing him in Afghanistan, Alexander the Great Satan, because all these things depend on which side you're on. Alexander the Great had coughed up the cash to build it, and as he had an enormous empire, this was just sort of money in the back of his pocket. And having built it, it was rapidly reckoned to be one of the great wonders of the world. Huge and apparently stunningly beautiful. I say apparently because if you look at the archaeological site now, and I can only tell you that you can see this on Google Earth, which is what I was doing this morning, then there's not a great deal to see of this incredible wonder of the world. Diana, who of course is a demon, has gone the way of all demons in that part of the world, replaced, unfortunately, with another. Now, that is the one interesting thing about Ephesus, but why would Alexander the Great want to put a great temple there? One of the reasons is this was also a big place of commerce, a really important port. And things are coming from everywhere, really, everywhere in the trading world, which back then was pretty big. People tend to think of the world being half undiscovered, but they knew much more of the world than we think they did. We forgot about great parts of it later on. And so from as far away as China and probably Zimbabwe and all the way up the north of what is now Russia and right the way through Europe, this was a great trading center. The Vikings used Ephesus, and you can find all sorts of odds and ends in archaeological digs all over Europe, which came from the Middle East and probably came from places like Ephesus. So an important place. Now, what is so great about this is that this means that you missionize Ephesus and you missionize the world. It's not like a sort of, in those days, tin pot little place like Jerusalem. It is a really important center of commerce. It's a wonder really it didn't become one of the other patriarchates, but anyway, it didn't. So important, incredibly important place. Even though nowadays of that ancient city very little is left. So important cultural and economic center. This, some years later, is going to, St. Paul's presence some years later, is going to vex the people no end, particularly a certain silversmith who sees his valuable trade in statues of the goddess or demoness Diana, sees the possibility of that important trade being lost. It hasn't occurred to him yet that he'd make an absolute fortune making crucifixes and other such stuff, and covers for icons, which I guess came later. So, like so many people, he was wanting to hang on to the past rather than look into the future. Anyway, so he arrives there, and it says he came to Ephesus and left them, that's Priscilla and Aquilla, there. They're going to pop up again later on, and much later on, we hear of them back in Rome. When he's writing to the people in Rome, he particularly mentions Aquilla and Priscilla. And if you go to Rome now, you'll find there is the Catacombe Santa Prisca, and there's a Saint Priscilla or Santa Prisca monument, which is a pyramid, irritatingly placed in the middle of the road. Anyway, there we go. And then he left them there. But he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. So he goes there and he teaches, that's what it means, reasoned. He teaches the Jewish people there. So again, St. Paul starts off by going back to the synagogue, teaching the people, teaching the chosen people in his mind, the gospel. And it looks as if he did quite well, because in verse 20 it says, when they asked him to stay longer time with them, he did not consent. So they were sufficiently interested to hear more, but he himself was in a hurry to get along. The Temple of Diana, by the way, was destroyed by the Goths around about the year 250, something like that. I can't remember. You might like to look that up. It's important. He doesn't come back to Ephesus for some time, but when he does come back, he stays a couple of years. Right, verse 21 to 23. But St. Paul took leave of them, saying, I must by all means keep this coming feast in Jerusalem, but I return again to you, God willing. And he sailed from Ephesus. First of all, it's really important to note that he doesn't say, I will return to you when I've done my business. He does return, but he makes it quite certain that he'll return only, God willing. Everything that he's doing by the will of God. I would say to people who are catechumens, one of the big troubles that we have is we say the Lord's Prayer. We say, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. So far, so good. And then we say, thy will be done. Ooh, on earth as it is in heaven. Ooh, ooh. If we're asking that God's will be done, then we're putting ourselves well past God. Not my will, as the Lord said, but your will. And offering to be part of God's will certainly land you in trouble, just like it landed St. Paul in trouble. And if you start doing God's will, from an earthly point of view, things will start going horribly wrong. They'll go horribly, wonderfully, horribly right from God's point of view, but all the things that you might choose for yourself will not happen quite in the same sort of way. Okay? Good morning to Ashley and to Frank and Michelle. Good morning to all of you. I'll read what you said in a moment. Right. The rest of the Lord's Prayer, despite the fact we barely know what it means, is much easier to say and doesn't actually involve you in a great deal. But that middle part there, you need to be really wary of. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our supersubstantial bread. I'm not quite sure what that means. Deliver us from the evil one. Forgive us our debts. We forgive those who have debts that they owe us. And lead us not in temptation. Okay. Forgiveness is also a big one. Dropping other people's debts, dropping the things they owe to you. In the same way as God doesn't demand any payment for the life that he's given to you. Right. Often translated as trespasses, but it depends on the translation you're looking at. So he's been invited to stay, he must go. And he sailed from Ephesus, and when he had landed at Caesarea, where no doubt he went to stay with St. Philip the deacon and his 4 daughters, and recovered from seasickness, he then went up and gone up and greeted the church. Now, in some places we think of up as being north and down as being south. In Britain, there's a convention, you say you go up to London and you might go up to the county town. But let's say you're in the county town, like this city here, Lincoln, and you're going up to London. From London you go down to Lincoln. If you were in Market Raisin, you go up to Lincoln and down to Market Raisin. From London, of course, you go down to absolutely everywhere else on earth. That, funny enough, is the convention. So you go from London down to New York, or London down to Washington, or London down to Cape Town. A certain amount of pig-headedness there. There we go. So where is he going up to? Well, he's gone up. It means he's gone up to Jerusalem. And you can find this in so many of the Psalms as well. The idea of going up to Jerusalem, up to the temple. So he's gone up, he's reported back to Jerusalem. He's had whatever the feast is that he's going to have. Presumably it's not a winter one. So it's got to be any time from spring through to around about now. And from there, he goes back to Antioch, where he makes his second report. Okay? And it says in verse 23, after he had spent some time there, he departed and went over the region of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthening all the disciples. So he goes back to Antioch. He makes his report there, just like I had to do a while ago. I was involved in some mission for the Patriarchate, and having done that mission, I then had to report back to the Patriarch. Makes sense, doesn't it? So St. Paul, he's received his orders from Antioch. He goes to Jerusalem, to the main center. He reports to the church, tells them what he's been doing. And then from there, he then goes to Antioch and he reports back there. He goes round, in other words, in a nice circle to where he began. And then from there, he starts off on another journey. He goes to Galatia and Phrygia, and you'll remember this is all part and parcel of his first missionary journey when he had gone from Cyprus to that part of the world with Barnabas, and he had met people like Timothy and Titus and co. Some of whom have left there. Now it goes back to strengthen them, to carry on teaching them, in other words. Leaving people in each place, for the moment anyway, in Ephesus, he leaves Aquilla and Priscilla. Or, as it says, Priscilla and Aquila. Interesting the way that it's Priscilla and Aquila. That's that shows a certain equality going on in St. Paul's mind and in St. Luke's. The women are not being subjected to the men in the same way as they would have been either in Rome or in Judaism. Okay, that's where we're going to end. There's some pretty important people to pray for today. I want you please to pray particularly today for a young man who's gone missing. He has run away from home. I'm only going to tell you his first name. His name is James. He is just 16. I know him. He's an extremely nice young man. His parents are frantic, as you might imagine. I'm not sure, with any luck, they might have found him by now, but I don't think so, otherwise they would have told me. And if you could pray that the police or his parents or somebody finds him and returns him back home, which is where he belongs and where he needs to be. I'm not going to tell you anything more about any of the situation. His name is James. Please pray for him. The second person put on the list is Christina, who is having an operation tomorrow in the middle of the morning, American time. So you know her. She often joins us. And if you could pray for her, please, I'm sure she would be very grateful and I would be very grateful. So please, for those two particularly. Another person who doesn't join us live at the moment, but joins us afterwards, is Thekla. If you could pray for her mother, Carol, who is having bleeds. If you could pray for her, again, I know that she would be very grateful. Maybe you could pray for my mother. My mother's been very poorly. She's nearly 101. She seems to have had a terrible infection in her leg, cellulitis, and has been in terrible pain. Her name is Dorothy. If you could pray for her, I'm sure my mother would be grateful, though she wouldn't remember you've done it. Bless her. Then we're praying anyway for Nicholas, who is very poorly. He went to his grandson's, maybe even great-grandson's baptism the other day, and is looking very, very frail. Pray for Nicoletta and Nicoletta, please. Continue to pray for Daniel, 18-year-old, who should have died well over a year ago. We carry on praying for him and praying for this miracle to continue into full health. There's another teenager called Joseph, who has also disappeared from home. If you could pray for him, I'd be grateful. He used to come to this church a long time ago. He's Coptic Orthodox. If you could pray also for Erin's son Joseph, for Lael and for Elizabeth, Christina's daughter, and for Judy, who watches this, and also for Dino's son Simon. And we're carrying on praying for Joan. Joan is now in Cyprus. So if you're living in Cyprus, you may well come across her. I think she's staying in Larnaca. So pray for her, pray that she may be able to get back home before too long. Pray for people in Lebanon, very close to my heart. We pray also for, oh gosh, all the terribles going on in that part of the world, Israel, West Bank, Gaza, for that part of not just South Lebanon anymore, but it's pretty well everywhere in Lebanon. Even they bombed a Christian city, Christian town the other day up in the north. Praying, as we always do, for Russia and Ukraine. Pray for wise heads who will be able to sort out these problems. These things are always in the end solved through people talking. And if they don't talk, they're not going to be sorted out. You always have to come to some sort of compromise. You cannot bomb people into submission because they'll pop up like mushrooms elsewhere. People have to feel in the end they've got a just end to whatever happened. There we go. Glad you like the idea about the meal, Ahmed. John, good evening. Our Patriarch Bartholomew is in Melbourne, the Ecumenical Patriarch, to celebrate 100 years of Orthodoxy in Australia. Well, after 2 years, St. Paul had made an incredible impression in Ephesus. I shall look later on to see what incredible impression Melbourne has had. I know it's one of the largest Greek cities on earth. It'll be interesting to see what percentage of that are local Australians, non-Greek Australians. Ashley Oza, Lemon, good afternoon. Yes, of course you're in Turkey, so it's daytime, afternoon. Thank you very much for your blessing. Frank, good morning. God bless you, my pleasure. You live a little less than 2 hours from Ephesus. You really should go and visit. Yes, indeed. And in fact, when you go, you'll find there's also the tomb of St. Philip the Apostle there, of which somehow or other I have a small fragment here, as well as a relic of him. Michelle says hi, Natalia says hi, Ahle says God bless you, everybody. Ahle, I often see you popping up on the live stream on Sundays. God bless you and keep you. I don't know where you come from though, anything else? Miss Connie, sorry you're so late, hello. Oh, so sorry, she says it twice. God bless you and keep you, Miss Connie. Just as we're entering into winter, and it's looking pretty horrible now, all the leaves are coming off the trees. I find that I could get depressed, so I try and pretend that I really like it. With the emphasis on try and pretend. The reality is I don't. There we go. Right. Have a wonderful day. Keep all those people pleased in your prayers. I'm going to be busy for the rest of the day making bookshelves to put into my new and improved library. Well, new library is being beautifully done, even with its own very own chandelier. Da, da, da. I'm going to get some more chandeliers, or as Colin always calls them, chandeliers. He knows very well that's not the name. Put in the church. Hopefully we should have 4 smallish ones, about 1 meter across, and at some stage in the future we can invest in a magnificent one. Yes, I'm definitely one of those people who thinks that more is more. I have never understood this thing that less is more. or that gilding the lily might be a bad idea. Of course the lily needs gilding. Right, your prayers. God bless you and keep you. In order to switch this off, I've got to go around the other side, but I don't know, what a nonsense. Maybe if I could turn it round, I guess. Let's see what happens. Aha. Oh, look at that. Right. God bless you and keep you. Bye-bye. Lord have mercy. What a world. Am I sure I want to stop sweeping? Yes.